Hi, everybody. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at DevOps.com and DevOps TV, and we are here at the second day of the DevOps Enterprise Summit 2018 in Las Vegas, and I'm having a lot of really fascinating conversations today. And this next conversation I know is going to be equally as fascinating. I have next to me Dominica DeGrandis. Sorry, my tongue stopped there for a second. You're Director of Digital Transformation at Tasktop, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, great. And then next to you is J. Paul Reed, who is Managing Partner?
Yeah.
Release Engineering Approaches. I got it. Yes. All right, great. So these folks are experts in the area of culture, and which, as we all know, is such a critical component of DevOps. But it seems to me that in conversations that I've had with many different people, culture kind of seems to be the forgotten element of DevOps, or at least the least considered element in DevOps. So what is your take?
Well, it's interesting. I was talking with a couple of first-time attendees, and this was over lunch yesterday, and they said, is the topic of DevOps so culture heavy? So it's interesting that for a lot of us that are in this space, we talk about tools and we talk about culture, and it can be sometimes easy to miss that cultural part. And then for other people that might be new to it, they see all of these talks as sort of huggy, touchy-feely, weird conversations. And so that was kind of an interesting perspective. But I think one thing that's really important is if you look at the companies that are really doing this well, and the topics that like Dominica talks about making work visible, and we had Dr. Maslach talking about burnout, right? Those seem like culture-y, touchy-feely topics, but you literally cannot do DevOps if you forget those things. So it's not that they are touchy-feely and they are important, but also you just can't do it. You can't do DevOps without thinking about that stuff.
So why do you think that culture has been kind of put on the back burner for a lot of companies when they're going down or starting their journey in DevOps? It seems to me that it should be as critical an element for them to consider, but it seems to be, as I said before, maybe it's not quantifiable or something. I'm not sure.
Well, who's selling culture, right? There's a lot of vendors selling tools, but who's selling culture? And it's hard. It's complex. You're dealing with all these humans, and the changes that need to be made are fundamental, and that's hard to do. And when people are promising all these improvements with a new tool set, then that's easier to accept, I think. What do you think? Yeah.
Well, I mean, culture is always sort of, part of the problem is culture just means a lot of things to people. So it's hard to have that conversation. It can be, when we're talking about it, sort of ephemeral, even though it permeates everything, right? But a tool, like you talk about a specific tool, you can say, is it good, is it bad, is it going to fit in our environment? You can actually prototype it. How do you prototype a culture? Like that gets hard and dangerous because you're trying to change behavior, right?
Tool is a resource.
Yeah.
A person is not a resource.
Right.
Can't hurt a tool's feelings.
Right, exactly, yeah. And so I think there's also a lot of companies all companies have established culture of some type, right? And so that can be hard. I mean, it's just like thinking about your own family and maybe, wanting to change all of the behaviors of your family unit. Like maybe we need to get out more and exercise. All of us need to exercise more. And it's like, okay, trying to get your family to do that can be difficult, right? Or we were talking about being mindful, right? And there is an aspect of that to it, right? You were saying that your son in school is being reminded to be mindful, and we were talking about our watches. And there's a cultural aspect of that of like, okay, being reminded to do the thing. It's like being reminded to be mindful is kind of ironic or funny, right?
Yeah.
And so there is almost, it's hard. It can be a nagging element when you're trying to change it. We're like, I'm trying to learn the new tool. I thought I'm doing the right thing, and now you're telling me also I have to be like happy and have to be up every day, and people are like, some days I'm not like that. And actually, I think a lot of the topics that Dominica talks about is giving people permission to be where they are, and that's an aspect of it, right? That
Yeah, because I have a sticker, it says more no, less whip.
I love that sticker.
And people, they love it. Everybody comes up to me, they want that sticker. And that's helping people understand that about flow and pull, and that we're trying to get people to pull work into their space when they have capacity to do that work, instead of this onslaught of work that people keep sort of slamming down. Everybody's got to be busy all the time, 100%. And when people realize that they have, how do they say no? I ask people, what prevents you from getting your work done? And, or why do you take on more work than you have capacity to do? And by far the answer is the boss or leadership. And so they feel like they can't say no. So when I start talking about limiting your WIP, and that it's actually this enabling constraint that allows people to say, I'm full right now, what do you want us to take off our plate so we can do your thing? People, just like, oh, okay, we like this. We like where this is going.
One of the things that Dominica has said for a long time, and I've always loved this, is you need to respect reality. And a lot of times that sort of, okay, we're doing the DevOps transformation so we can move faster, so we can, there's all of these reasons that it gets funded and that it gets started. And there oftentimes, though, is that not respecting reality, is that, sometimes you have to go slower and be deliberate about tooling and about culture and about incentives and how the work is structured and what it looks like to go faster. And the going slower to go faster is not actually usually part of the value proposition, but that's that respecting reality, and that's where a lot of that cultural, it's funny, soft skills, but soft skills are actually really difficult. They're really hard, right? Come into play when you're trying to do this.
In one sense, it's common sense to people. If you've got way too much on your plate, then you're not going to get it done. But on the other side, people don't get it. You're telling me to hold off on starting something, right? Yeah. Because people think that they can multitask, and they don't recognize all the cost and context switching. And so that alone, I was talking about calendars, unbalanced calendars.
I love that talk too.
The too many meetings. And I would show these calendars that are, I called it the all-day cram, the 30-minute jam, and the all-day wham, basically, where people's calendars are just back-to-back meetings all day long. And so if you got meetings going on all day long, then when do the creative people, the people who design and write and code, when do they have time to do their work uninterrupted? Well, midnight or Sunday. Sunday's the new Monday now. And so there's an aspect, if we can talk about limiting WIP, but how does an employee reject a meeting invite from the boss? That's sort of where the rubber hits the road.
And so the one really interesting thing that I would say, bringing it back to sort of an issue or a question of culture, is, so I do a lot of work with teams on postmortems and retrospectives for incidents. So the point is, the calendar aspect, and also you can see it in a post-incident report that gets written, right? That is a cultural artifact, right? What gets written down, what doesn't get written down. I love that in the calendar talk, people will nod because it's like, was that a screenshot of my calendar? But the point here is that the structure of the calendar matters to how we do work, how we get better at doing work, how we increase our flow. On the post-incident side, how we learn as an organization, you can actually infer how good or how much work is left to be done in those areas by looking at the structure of the artifact. And so the point is, people often think, well, culture's hand-wavy. There's actually artifacts that you can look at in an organization and say, we need to improve, like we can see it on everybody's calendar, let's work to improve that. Or we can see in a post-incident report that it's just a list of blaming people. Like this team did that and this team did that. And so what's funny is that's a concrete part of culture that you can look at and that you can work to improve.
So this, obviously this is greater than DevOps. culture, this impacts every corner of business. Developers and IT professionals,
business people have
marketing,
problems
everything.
too.
So I certainly know plenty of people who have a calendar that is completely jammed up, and these people are creative people, and they are sacrificing valuable time with working on the weekends, working at nights, which does have an impact, I see, on their performance overall, because they're, they don't have any time to decompress. They don't have any time for themselves, just to kind of relax and be with their families or whatever. So I certainly see exactly what you're talking about. But I think there's also this idea, and it's been kind of ingrained in our society, that if you're not working all the time, then you're slacking off. And that's kind of a hard hurdle to overcome, especially if you've got the boss breathing down your neck. So how do you guys, how do you address that and that kind of whole slacker mentality?
Well, so for me, one of the really important parts of culture is language, right? What do we call things? What are the actual words that we use? And I find it very heartening that you see leaders in the DevOps community, and these are business leaders as well, but also leaders in the SRE community. That Google SRE book uses the word toil, eliminate toil, right? And that's we know what that means. It has a very, very rich context when you say someone is toiling away. Keeping people on call. The fact that we're framing that now as inhumane, right? If they're on call 24/7, that language I think helps to get other people to understand. You really shouldn't be keeping people on call 24/7, right? So I think changing some of that language can help with that, and I'm starting to see that, and that we have a lot of work to do. And also, again, Dr. Maslach talking about burnout. It's like, this isn't touchy-feely, it's science.
Right.
Like, it's an entire career of science. You can go read the papers.
Yeah, her talk yesterday was fantastic. And you could just feel the energy in the audience. Like, yeah, we want some of that.
I was watching it with someone, and it was interesting because she was saying, she was having a little bit of an epiphany, like, I feel that way. Am I burnt out? And so there was a little bit of a realization, and she's an executive, right? And there is an empathy about that. A lot of times it's easy to say, well, the boss is breathing down my neck, but it's interesting to look at, like, those people are people too. And there are a lot of hallway conversations about that here, because you've got leaders here. And there is a sense of some of these things affect them just like they do everyone else. So I'm glad we're talking about it, because that's the first step to doing something about it.
Yeah. I do think a lot of it, though, does boil down from the top. I mean, people want to be needed. People want to get their needs met. And that doesn't always happen. And they're trying to get their needs met, which isn't always happening.
Right.
And so if people are getting their sense of their positional space in the tribe, or wherever that is, how are people getting incentivized is huge. So we used to, and we still see it. I was up till 2 a.m. working on that problem. Oh, good job!
The
and you
hero
get the
worship.
award.
Yeah.
And so it's going to, tell me how you're going to measure me, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. And if we're going to give people, what do they call it, positive punishment or something? I forget the term, but we're giving, if leadership is providing positive reinforcement for behaviors that really should go away or be reduced, then that exacerbates the problem. So that's one thing I love about where I work now. I love our leadership. They recognize problems and do something about it.
What I like to say, humans are great incentive machines. Like, they are great at finding out what the actual real incentive is and then acting that way. And that's almost it is a cultural trait, but like, we're hardwired to do that, right? And so it's interesting. Incentives are another type of feedback loop, and we talk about feedback loops in DevOps all day long.
It's true.
And there is almost you could make the argument that there's sort of a cultural pipeline that can give you feedback about, it's Dr. Maslach had that bit about the award that management thought everybody liked. It was like, everybody hated that award. And they finally asked them, the scores on this are very low, and then they were like, the award is all political. only the managers win it because only the managers can, nominate people, so they always nominate their peer. And so there was this, again, that's an artifact, that's a concrete artifact. And once they started changing that, I don't know if they did away with the award or they did something different. And it's funny, there wasn't even any monetary value, but it made people feel better about being in that system because they just thought that aspect of it was so unfair.
Interesting.
And so gained.
Can I ask him a question?
Sure.
So, you've just done this amazing educational program, and I'm so curious, like, how are you able to, what are you able to use from that now in your work? Like,
Dominica is referencing. I just finished my master's in human factors and system safety.
Congratulations.
And, thank you. And so the reason you hear me using the word artifacts is because I studied how organizations use post-incident, post-mortem, so reports and JIRA tickets, they generate all of these artifacts.
Right.
And so when I talk about the structure, all of that came from that research. Was looking at how the structure of a post-incident report, what do they actually do, and how does that, permeate their system, and how do they use it? And so that's what I was like, I think there are cultural artifacts that you can look at how they percolate through the system. Is it a good award? Do people feel it's fair? Is one, right? Calendars, right? Another one, right? And so I would actually, challenge the audience, like, when you go back, think about what are the artifacts in our organization that tell us something about our culture, and then if you want to change it, look into how can we tweak those. Is it blocking out time on calendars? Is it being deliberate about how we do our postmortems and what we write down? Right, there's a wealth of ways to do that.
So we once had an artifact, which I'm recognizing now would be an artifact, which was the night owl. So if you pulled an all-nighter, and you came into your cube the next day, this is at a startup, came into your cube the next day, and there was an owl in your cube, hoorah, because you pulled this all-nighter. You got an owl in your cube.
Well, I'll give you one that's a little darker, but it's still the same sort of thing. So I did build and release engineering. In fact, we have that in common too. We used to talk about build and release engineers back in the day. That's my first love. But so this is a question for you. I'm curious if you ran into this. So every build team that I ever worked on, you could bribe them with alcohol. So, no, I'm serious. It was like we had one team, tequila was their thing. So if they stayed up doing a build for you, there'd be a nice bottle of tequila. For one team, it was scotch, right? And what's interesting about that is an artifact. You're bribing and changing incentives. But really, what does that tell you about the system? It tells you that maybe you're not investing in the build pipeline because you're having someone actually do the build manually, or you're having them stay up, right? That's the part you can change. But the artifact that you have to look for is people are bribing their colleagues, and it's a positive thing. They're trying to be there for them, but they're still bribing them. And that means something is wrong in the structure of how the work is getting done.
Oh, I just thought that just triggered an idea. Sorry, we're just yakking away here.
That's all right.
But when we first started to make our work visible, this is back like 2005 at Corvus, the build team wasn't on the board. So we had analyze, dev, dev done, test ready, deploy. And we were like nothing gets to production without us doing that. So it comes back to this sense of how do I fit into this tribe, and where do people see where I could provide value? Because I'm just trying to provide value too.
And you see that with dev, ops teams were the same way, right? They were not really ever accounted for in the value stream. And it's so funny because it's DevOps. It's literally in the name, right? So now, though people are seeing that, and that's great. But again, what other teams, QA or release engineers, it's funny. Dominica was at a thing, and I asked, "Are there any release engineers in the room?" And nobody's hands went up, and she tweeted, "It's a dying breed."
Yikes! Well, culture. We could go on all day about culture, and I have a feeling you guys are going to go out there and you're going to go on and on about culture, which is awesome. I really like that, and I think it's really, really important. And I think organizations really do need to pay more attention to the culture, and even monetizing it, finding ways to bring in teams or something to help them change their organizational culture. But unfortunately, we don't have that much time on the video. So
what can I say?
Sure, you
can
say
I
one
do
more
a
thing,
plug?
yeah.
Yeah. So what I was going to say, I was thinking about culture and what you said, monetizing. Reminds me of Westrom, who's a researcher, and you want to, and this is explored in Accelerate, which is Nicole's book. She talks about culture in that book. So there's some ideas in there about improving culture actually delivers business value, and so she expands on that idea in there. But it's a great resource if you're like, okay, I may be convinced, but I need numbers to be more convinced.
Right.
That book is great. Love
All
it.
right.
And also, it's all in there.
All right, great. Well, thanks to you both for joining me on this conversation. It's again, it's something we could talk about all afternoon, and you know, I know a lot of people are grappling with it. So thanks very much.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you.
us.